The year is 1718. The air hangs thick with the scent of salt and stale rum. A pirate ship, her black flag tattered but defiant, lies anchored in a secluded Caribbean cove. Her crew, a motley collection of cutthroats and rogues, are deep in the throes of plundered revelry. Stolen silks and silver glint on her deck, testament to their recent brutal success. The lookout, a grizzled veteran with one eye, squints against the glare of the morning sun. Then he sees it. Pale triangle of canvas, impossibly distant on the horizon. A whisper of dread snakes through the ship. The captain, a man whose name strikes fear into the hearts of merchants across the Atlantic, raises his brass spyglass. He studies the silhouette, his weathered face hardening, and in that moment, cold, undeniable dread seizes him. His stomach drops, because that is not a merchant ship, laden with easy spoils. That is not a Royal Navy sloop, a nuisance to be outrun. That is a frigate, and the moment he sees those three towering masts, that long, sleek hull cutting through the waves, those menacing rows of black gun ports, he knows. He knows with a certainty that chills him to the bone. His entire crew is in mortal danger. Within an hour, anchors are cut in a desperate scramble. Sails are unfurled in a panic that sweeps through the ship like a plague. Men who, moments ago, were singing bawdy shanties and gambling away their ill-gotten gains are now pulling on lines with terror etched into their eyes. Because every pirate in the Caribbean, from the smallest cabin boy to the most feared captain, knew one immutable truth. You did not fight a frigate, you ran. And if the frigate had the wind, if she had you in her sights, you probably died anyway. This is the story of the warship that didn't just fight pirates, it ended the Golden Age of Piracy. The ship that hunted Blackbeard through the treacherous inlets of Ocracoke. The ship that ran down Bartholomew Roberts, the most successful pirate of his age, off the coast of West Africa. This is the story of the frigate. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why 1,000 cutthroats and killers would rather face the fury of a hurricane than face one of these ships in open water. To truly understand the frigate, you first have to understand the monumental problem it was built to solve. The Spanish treasure fleets, laden with gold and silver from the New World, had inadvertently created an entire economy of theft. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean had transformed islands like Tortuga and Port Royal into some of the richest, most coveted places on Earth. And along every vital shipping lane, from the bustling ports of the Carolinas to the distant, lucrative coasts of West Africa, pirates were swarming. They weren't just a nuisance, they were a strategic disaster. By the 1700s, piracy was costing the British Empire alone millions of pounds a year, a staggering sum. Insurance rates in London soared to crippling levels. Merchants, terrified of losing their valuable cargo and their lives, refused to sail without heavily armed escorts. Colonial governors, desperate and frustrated, begged the Admiralty in London for protection. The problem was, the Royal Navy, for all its might, had the wrong tools for the job. The undisputed pride of every navy in this era was the ship of the line. These were the floating fortresses of the age, the battleships of their day. A first-rate ship of the line, a true behemoth, carried over 100 guns on 3 massive decks, was crewed by 800 hardened men, and displaced more than 2,000 tons. These colossal vessels were unstoppable in fleet battles, capable of unleashing devastating broadsides that could shatter enemy formations. But against pirates, they were utterly useless. They drew too much water, their massive hulls scraping the seabed, preventing them from entering the shallow inlets and hidden coves where pirates sought refuge. They sailed too slowly, their ponderous bulk unable to catch a nimble pirate sloop. And the cost of operating just one ship of the line for a single year could fund an entire colony. On the other end of the naval spectrum was the sloop, a small, single-masted ship with a single deck and perhaps 10 or 12 guns. Sloops were fast, shallow-drafted, and could chase pirates almost anywhere, but they lacked firepower. A pirate sloop, crewed by 60 desperate men armed with cutlasses and pistols, often had the numbers and ferocity to overwhelm a Navy sloop in close combat. Boarding actions favored sheer numbers and brutal aggression, and pirates had plenty of both.
So, the navies of Europe faced a profound paradox. They needed a ship fast enough to chase a pirate, shallow enough
enough to follow him into his hidden lair, and powerful enough to blow him out of the water when they finally caught him. They needed a hybrid. They needed something new. In the early 1700s, naval architects across Europe, in France, the Netherlands, and Britain, began converging on an answer. That answer was the frigate. The very word frigate has roots in the Mediterranean, where the term fragata had been used for centuries to describe small, fast galleys. By the 1640s, the Dutch were applying the name to a new type of full-rigged sailing ship, a single-deck cruiser built explicitly for speed. The French, ever at the forefront of naval innovation, refined the design throughout the 1700s, producing some of the finest fast sailors of the era. The Royal Navy, keenly observing its rivals, eventually adopted and standardized the frigate as a distinct and indispensable class of warship. By the 1740s, the typical Royal Navy frigate had settled into a recognizable, formidable form. She measured around 140 feet on the gun deck, with a beam of approximately 38 feet. She drew between 15 and 17 feet of water, deep enough for blue water sailing across vast oceans, yet shallow enough to enter most harbors and even many river mouths. She displaced between 500 and 1,000 tons, depending on her rating, and she carried somewhere between 28 and 44 guns, all mounted on a single, continuous gun deck located above the waterline. That single gun deck was the true stroke of genius in the frigate's design. By placing all her main armament on one deck, the frigate kept her center of gravity remarkably low. This meant she could carry a full press of sail in heavier weather without the terrifying risk of rolling her gun ports underwater. A ship of the line, by stark contrast, had to close her lower gun ports in even a moderate swell, because if water poured in, she would quickly capsize. A frigate could fight, could maneuver, could dominate in conditions that would render a ship of the line utterly helpless. She could also sail faster, point higher into the wind, and turn tighter, making her an agile predator. Her sail plan was another marvel of engineering and seamanship. A standard frigate carried 3 masts in a full ship rig, meaning square sails on the foremast, mainmast, and mizzenmast, complemented by fore and aft sails between them for fine maneuvering and superior windward performance. A skilled crew could spread enough canvas to drive her along at an astonishing 12, 13, even 14 knots in a strong wind. For comparison, a typical pirate sloop, even in ideal conditions, might manage 9 or 10 knots at best. Once a frigate had the wind, the chase was, effectively, over. But speed alone was not enough. The frigate also had to win the fight at the end of that chase. And here is where her armament tipped the balance from a fair fight into an absolute massacre. A 28-gun 6th-rate frigate, for instance, carried 24 9-pounder long guns on her main gun deck, supplemented by 4 6-pounders on her quarterdeck and forecastle. A 9-pound iron ball, fired from one of these cannons, traveled at over 1,200 feet per second and could punch through several feet of solid oak at close range. It could dismount a pirate's gun, splinter his deck into deadly shrapnel, and turn a man into a red cloud of mist at 100 yards. And the frigate could deliver 14 of these balls per broadside, reloaded by trained gun crews every 90 seconds. A pirate sloop, even a heavily armed one, might mount 10 or 12 4-pounder guns. These were lighter, shorter ranged, and far less destructive. In a stand-up gunnery duel, a sloop facing a frigate was outranged, outgunned, and utterly outclassed. The math was so brutal, so overwhelmingly one-sided, that any pirate captain who truly understood it would never, ever accept battle on those terms. Which is precisely why pirates ran, and which is precisely why the frigate was built, to run them down. The Royal Navy's West Indies Squadron became the spearhead of the anti-piracy campaign. Based at strategic ports like Port Royal in Jamaica and English Harbour in Antigua, this squadron patrolled the vast, pirate-infested Caribbean from the 1700s onward. Vessels like HMS Scarborough, HMS Pearl, HMS Swallow, HMS Lime, and HMS Adventure became names that pirates whispered with a mixture of hatred and profound fear. In 1717, HMS Scarborough engaged Edward Teach himself, the infamous man the world would come to know as Blackbeard. The fight was inconclusive. Blackbeard, cunning and ruthless, slipped away into the shallow waters he knew so well, but it was a sign of what was coming. The Royal Navy was learning his haunts. The Royal Navy was patient, and the Royal Navy would be back. The hunt for Blackbeard reached its bloody climax in the fall of 1718. Governor Alexander Spotswood of Virginia, fed up with Blackbeard's brazen depredations along the Carolina coast, coast, took matters into his own hands. He chartered 2 small sloops, the Jane and the Ranger, and crewed them with sailors and marines drawn from 2 Royal Navy frigates anchored in the James River, HMS Pearl and HMS Lime. The command of this perilous expedition went to a determined lieutenant of the Pearl named Robert Maynard. Maynard sailed south, tracking his quarry. He found Blackbeard anchored at Ocracoke Inlet on the outer banks of North Carolina, hidden among the treacherous shoals where no large warship could ever reach him. On the morning of November 22nd, 1718, the 2 sloops crept into the inlet. Blackbeard fought them with his usual terrifying ferocity. A devastating broadside from his ship, the Adventure, killed 20 of Maynard's men in a single horrific blast. But Maynard, a shrewd tactician, had hidden the rest of his crew below decks, and when Blackbeard, confident of victory, boarded what he thought was a crippled, abandoned vessel, the Navy sailors swarmed up from the hold, overwhelming him in a brutal melee. Blackbeard died on the deck of the Jane, riddled with 5 gunshot wounds and over 20 cutlass cuts. His head was severed and hung from the bowsprit, a grim trophy. The Jane and the Ranger sailed back to Virginia with that grisly message swinging in the wind. The message to every pirate in the Atlantic was clear. The Royal Navy was coming, and the Royal Navy was using the resources of her frigates to do it. A few years later, in 1722, came the engagement that effectively broke the back of Caribbean piracy. The target was Bartholomew Roberts, known to history as Black Bart. Roberts was, by far, the most successful pirate of the Golden Age, capturing more than 400 ships in his short, brutal career. He commanded a formidable flotilla, led by his flagship, the Royal Fortune, mounting 40 guns and crewed by over 150 men. He was, by every measure, the king of the pirates, seemingly untouchable. Except that Captain Challoner Ogle of HMS Swallow had been hunting him for months. The Swallow was a 50-gun, 4th-rate ship, larger than a typical frigate, but operating in the exact same role, a fast, independent cruiser. Ogle tracked Roberts across the vast Atlantic to the coast of West Africa. At Cape Lopez, in what is now Gabon, he found Roberts anchored with his consort, the Ranger. Ogle approached under false colors, pretending to be a helpless merchant. The pirates took the bait, sending the Ranger out to capture what they thought was easy prey. Ogle led the Ranger out of sight of the main pirate force, then suddenly ran out his guns and revealed his true identity. The Ranger surrendered after a short, sharp fight. Ogle then returned to Cape Lopez to finish the job. On the morning of February 10th, 1722, the Swallow caught the Royal Fortune trying to escape. The pirates, celebrating a recent capture, were drunk from a cargo of wine. Roberts himself, dressed in his finest crimson coat with gold chains around his neck, prepared to fight to the last. He never got the chance. The very first broadside from the Swallow killed him instantly when a grape shot tore through his throat. His men, demoralized and hungover, threw his body overboard to prevent the British from displaying it. Then they surrendered. The trial that followed at Cape Coast Castle was the largest piracy trial in history. 264 pirates were tried, 54 were hanged, many more were sent to slavery or imprisonment. The Golden Age of Piracy did not end on a single day, but if it had a death scene, this was it. And the executioner was a single, frigate warship. So, how did the frigate actually catch her prey? Because chasing a pirate across the vast, unpredictable Caribbean was not a simple matter of pointing your ship at him and going. It was a delicate science that combined unparalleled seamanship, precise navigation, and brutal, unwavering discipline. The first principle was the long chase. A pirate sloop in open water might have a top speed advantage of a knot or two in certain wind conditions, especially in light airs or when running directly before the wind. But in a stiff breeze, with all sails set, a frigate could match or even exceed her. And here is the key. A frigate could maintain that speed for days. Pirates could not. Pirates had small crews, limited provisions, and exhausted, undisciplined men. A frigate, by contrast, had a crew of 200 or 300 highly trained sailors working in disciplined watches, constantly rotating. She could keep the chase up for a week if she had to. To squeeze every last fraction of speed out of the ship, frigate captains used techniques that bordered on the obsessive. They rigged studding sails, extra canvas extending out beyond the yards on light spars to capture every whisper of wind. They wetted the sails with seawater so they would hold the air more tightly, creating a more efficient airfoil. They pumped fresh water overboard to lighten lighten the ship, even by a few tons. They shifted ballast to trim her perfectly, ensuring optimal balance. They even had men climb out onto the bowsprit to act as living counterweights, pushing the bow down to reduce drag. The pirate, in his desperation, would do the same. He would throw cannons overboard to lighten his ship. He would dump valuable cargo. He would even hack away parts of his own deck to reduce weight. The chase became a brutal contest of will, a test of endurance, and the Navy almost always won. When the frigate finally caught her quarry, she had two devastating ways to end it. The first was simple destruction. Pull up alongside, run out the guns, and pound the pirate to splinters. A single broadside from a 32-gun frigate could shatter a sloop's mainmast, dismount half her guns, and kill a third of her crew. Two broadsides usually ended the fight, reducing the pirate vessel to a broken, burning hulk. The frigate would then board what was left, secure the survivors, and tow the prize back to port. The second option was more dramatic, more surgical. It was called a cutting-out expedition. When a pirate had taken refuge in a harbor or river too shallow for the frigate to enter, the captain would launch his ship's boats. The longboats and barges, packed with armed sailors and Royal Marines, would row in under the cover of darkness or fog. They carried muskets, cutlasses, pistols, and grenades. They would swarm the pirate ship at anchor, kill or capture the crew, and bring the vessel back to the frigate as a prize. The Royal Marines aboard a frigate were a critical component of this whole system. A frigate carried between 30 and 50 Marines, depending on her size. They were trained in small arms drill, in close-quarter combat, in boarding tactics, and in shore landings. They were the precision instrument that complemented the frigate's blunt force. When the broadsides could not reach a target, the Marines could. And then there was the gunnery itself. The Royal Navy in this era trained her gun crews to a standard that no merchant ship, and certainly no pirate crew, could ever match. A well-drilled British frigate could fire 3 broadsides in 5 minutes. That meant a wall of iron coming at the enemy every minute and 40 seconds. Pirates, for all their ferocity, were not trained gunners. They were sailors and thieves who fired their guns occasionally, often with poor aim and slower reloads. The discipline gap was enormous, and in a stand-up fight, it was always decisive. But the frigate was not just a pirate hunter. As the 1700s wore on, this class of ship became the most versatile, indispensable weapon in any navy's arsenal. She escorted convoys of vital merchant ships across hostile oceans, protecting the lifeblood of empires. She raided enemy commerce, capturing prize ships for profit, crippling rival economies. She scouted ahead of fleets, ran dispatches between admirals, and showed the flag in every harbor of the world, projecting power and influence. The captain of a frigate often operated independently, far from any squadron, making his own crucial decisions. This was a romantic, challenging role, and it produced some of the most famous officers in naval history. Men like Edward Pellew, Philip Broke, and a young Horatio Nelson all made their reputations in frigates before they ever commanded a ship of the line. By the late 1700s, the design had reached its mature, almost perfect form. The French Navy was producing frigates of stunning quality, ships like the Hébé class, with finer lines and better sailing qualities than anything the British had. When the Royal Navy captured these vessels, they often copied them directly, a testament to their superior design. Naval architecture was a moving target, and every navy in Europe was learning from every other. The age of the sailing frigate ended in the middle of the 1800s, when steam power and iron hulls began to transform naval warfare irrevocably. The last great sailing frigates were built in the 1850s, magnificent vessels like the USS Wabash and the British Mersey class, representing the final flowering of a tradition that stretched back over 200 years. Then, steam engines, screw propellers, and ironclad armor changed everything, and the wooden frigate, as a frontline warship, slipped into history. But the name survived. In every modern navy in the world today, you will find ships called frigates. The USS Constellation, the HMS Iron Duke, the French Aquitaine class, the Indian Shivalik class, the Japanese Mogami class. These are missile-armed warships, bristling with computers, helicopter decks, and gas turbine engines. They have nothing in common technologically with the wooden ships that hunted Blackbeard, but they share a name, and more importantly, they share a role. They are the cruisers of the modern fleet, the fast, flexible, hard-hitting ships that do the everyday work of naval power projection. They are the direct descendants of the ship that ended the Golden Age of Piracy. And if you visit Boston Harbor today, you can still see one of the ancestors. The USS Constitution lies at her berth at the Charlestown Navy Yard, the oldest commissioned warship still afloat anywhere in the the world. Tourists wander her decks, children ring her bell, old veterans salute her flag. Below the waterline, her live oak hull still holds the saltwater of 2 centuries. And if you close your eyes and listen to the creak of her timbers, you can almost hear the echo of an age when ships like her ran down pirates across the open ocean, when a sail on the horizon could mean death or salvation, depending on whose flag it carried, when the world's oceans were patrolled by these long, sleek, wooden hunters with their rows of black gun ports and their crews of disciplined men. The pirates of the Caribbean live forever in our movies and stories. Captain Jack Sparrow and Blackbeard and Bart Roberts are immortal characters in the popular imagination, but the ship that beat them, the ship that broke them, the ship that swept their world away is mostly forgotten outside of naval history circles. That ship was the Frigate, and for nearly 2 centuries, she was the most feared sight on any pirate's horizon. She still is, in a way, because every modern frigate that patrols the Strait of Hormuz, every modern cruiser hunting drug smugglers in the Caribbean, every helicopter-armed warship intercepting Somali pirates in the Gulf of Aden, every single one of them is doing the same job that HMS Pearl did at Ocracoke Inlet and that HMS Swallow did at Cape Lopez. They are using fast, well-armed cruisers to police the oceans. The technology has changed beyond recognition. The mission has not. The Frigate is still the answer. If you made it this far, you clearly love the deep history of warfare and the sea. Subscribe to the channel for more long-form documentaries on the ships, soldiers, and battles that shaped the modern world.